What's up, and welcome to another edition of the Cover 2 Recap. I'm Edward Lewis, publisher of BruinSportsport.com. This is Joey Kaufman, the UCLA beat writer for OC Register, and I almost wanted to change this name of the Cover 2 Recap to the Cover 3 Recap for Josh Rosen, who wears number 3. Josh is the story of the day. UCLA beats Virginia by 20 or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but Josh is the man. Scores 3 touchdowns, 351 yards, 28 of 35. The first true freshman to start a UCLA game in history. You can go down the list. What do you think of Josh today?
It's hard not to gush, quite frankly, but I think the thing that stood out to me the most was how much they let him throw. I mean, he threw 35 times. I mean, they didn't at all kind of go with the conservative game plan where he's going to hand the ball off to Paul Perkins. I mean, the first throw right out of the gate was a 75-yard bomb to win like 50 yards in the air. I mean, I think that was the thing that stood out to me is he's our guy and we're going to let him kind of sling it around a lot.
We got in trouble, I think, in the spring for some fans because we gushed over Rosen way too much. But there's just nothing you can say that justifies his performance today. I mean, he had 35 throws or whatever, completed 28 of them, and realistically couldn't completed all of them except for one overthrow to Jordan Payton. So, I mean, he was incredible today, and I really don't know how to compare it to anything. I mean, have you ever seen a true freshman in any year at any team do this at any point in the season? Even in the NFL, I mean, Andrew Luck did really well with the Indianapolis Colts, but rookies don't do this kind of thing. I mean, can you compare it to anything?
It's really a number. I wrote a blog post in May about just the track record of true freshman quarterbacks. It's not great, but if you look at a lot of them, it's a lot of times 3 or 4 stars playing on a team like Rutgers or a team that's not kind of as not a top 15 team, and this is a kind of a unique situation where you have the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country playing on a top 15 team. That doesn't happen a lot.
And Virginia is they're not. I don't know if they're going to be very good this year, but I mean they're better than the UTSAs of the world and the Arkansas States of the world. I mean this is a D1 team that he just beat up and beat them up pretty good. After the game, we talked to a bunch of players and we heard a lot of chosen Rosens, a lot of Jay Chosens, a lot of Rosen ones. I mean, what was your vibe from the players after the game about his performance?
They were really eager to gush. Unlike, I think Jim Moore is trying to kind of downplay the expectations a little bit for Rosen. They don't want to kind of build them up too much. The players, I think, are really excited, quite frankly. I think I mentioned to Eldridge Massington that Rosen hit 11 different receivers, and he kind of jumped out and said, "Whoa, really?" And I mean, that's really impressive for a quarterback, a true freshman quarterback, not just to lean on. He didn't just lean on Jordan Payton and Devin Fuller. I mean, this was a guy who was hitting Logan Sweet. He was hitting Kenny Clark in the end zone. I mean, he was hitting a lot of different guys. I think that was something that really kind of impressed them and impressed me was just his vision and hitting a ton of different guys.
And you hit on it. I think a lot of the players were just happy. I mean, you generally see them happy about the potential of this team. I think Thomas Duarte kind of put it best. We asked, well, what is Josh Rosen's potential? And he just kind of shook his head and laughed. I mean, there is no limit for Josh. So let's get into other things about the game. I mean, Josh was the storyline and was the number one thing we need to talk about. But some of your standouts from the day, who else kind of popped to you that could help this team make a run in the future here?
Well, this is an obvious one, but I thought the defensive line looked really good, especially Kenny Clark and Eddie Vanderdoes. I think on Virginia's first or second play of the game, they hand the ball off, and it's a tackle for a loss. Vanderdoes and Clark are right there. I mean, that's kind of a well-established strength of this team, but if you're looking what really stood out, I mean, teams are going to have a tough time running against them.
The offensive line, I thought, played really well. I know they didn't really run the ball as well as they probably would have liked today, especially with Paul Perkins in there in the beginning of the game because Virginia's game plan was to stop Paul. But the O-line gave Rosen all kinds of time, and we've seen Rosen in high school. When you give him time, it's over, and that was the same thing today. Any other standouts to you? Soso Jamamo kind of flashed a little bit. He had the nice long run. I think it was interesting they got him a lot of touches in the game. I think he had 80 yards or about in the long run was, I think, a nice run. It was kind of later in the game, but that stood out. Darius Pickett filling in for Ishmael Adams. I know Ish got suspended, and everybody's worried who's going to replace him, who's going to do what. Pickett comes in, fills in that nickel role immediately, is sticky in coverage all day long, gets an interception, has 3 tackles, so he deserves some shout-out here. So we'll wrap up the Cover 2 recap today talking about UCLA's win and what it means for the future. What did you take from this game and what it means for UCLA going forward?
Everybody talks about this team doesn't have a ceiling. I think the quarterback question is answered. I think people have a general sense of Rosen and kind of maybe figuring out what he is. But the interesting thing is he made a lot of different type of throws, and I think that's going to be the interesting thing to watch as he hit kind of that post corner route Duarte on one of the drives. He hit the deep ball. He has really good timing on some of the shorter routes. He seems to have a really large repertoire, and there's a really good kind of, Nobles only talked about this is a really good foundation for him. And I think that's the case. He does a lot of different things when he's throwing the ball. And, I mean, they really do have a very good quarterback.
I thought defensively, I think we were talking about this off camera, that they're probably going to have a tendency to get picked apart this season, especially when they play better quarterbacks like Jared Goff and whatnot. That the cornerbacks aren't as great as what you would like to see. Their linebackers, Kenny Young and Miles Jack, got exposed a little bit in coverage today as well. But their pass rush is very good. So, I mean, they'll have a chance. But offensively, if Rosen plays like this and continues to grow, I'm not sure there's any team in the country that can hang with this offense, especially then they get to the red zone and you're like, okay, well, it's 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, whatever. They just bring Miles Jack and he runs in and plows for a touchdown. So, I mean, there's so many weapons on this offense that, man, I don't know if there is a ceiling on this team right now.
The concern I would have for later in the season, as you mentioned, the secondary, and if they're getting picked apart, is Josh Rosen, is a true freshman going to win a shootout? I think today you see with kind of a low-pressure situation, UCLA's got a lead. They're not really trailing by too much. He kind of, it's a little more relaxed. And Noel called a good game. He did a lot of short stuff and then take your shots when needed. But in a game where it's going to be 45-42 and Rosen's going to have to huck it a lot, is that a situation you want to put him in? I think that's something to watch. If the secondary does get picked apart and you're having Rosen throw 45 times a game, that's not an ideal scenario. So today they put him in a good position, I think, to do well. And he should be able to do that.
That'll wrap up our coverage from the UCLA-Virginia game out here at the Rose Bowl. As always, you can follow Joey's coverage on Twitter at Joey R. Kaufman. You can follow my coverage of UCLA on Twitter at Edward_Lewis. Until the next time, thanks for tuning in to the Cover 2 Recap.